Right, so this will be our first meeting as the Net Zero Carbon Group of EXA, and the industry at large. Is not limited to EXA. The reason we are all getting together is because of the Net Zero Carbon Events Initiative. In a nutshell, the Net Zero Carbon Initiative was initiated by the Joint Meetings Industry Council, the JMIC. The people that initiated this council and the initiative are companies like Informa, Jarvis, München, Freeman, Clarion, GL. It's all the biggest players in the worldwide industry. They created and supported this. And generally speaking, these are all companies that our companies sort of work below in the supply chain. And if these guys are putting their competitive differences aside to tackle this problem or this issue, then we're going to have to do the same. Otherwise, we're going to get left behind. And one of the reasons they initiated it is to be part of the solution to tackle the threat of climate change, which, unless you're a staunch denialist, I mean, the evidence is there and it's obvious. So far, or as of about 2-3 weeks back, they had 190 plus signatories, as well as 100 plus other supporters. These would be role players in the exhibition industry, associations, companies. So X's joined the initiative, for example. My company's joined the initiative. Gary, I think yours is too. We all keep a close eye on what's going on, and so far they seem very good with information. Just broad goals are to jointly communicate the industry's commitment to tackling climate change and driving towards net zero by 2050. It's also to develop common methodologies for measuring the industry's direct, indirect, and supply chain greenhouse gas emissions, and construct an industry-wide roadmap towards net zero by 2050. And I believe emissions reductions by 2030 in line with the Paris Agreement. Then further to that, to foster collaboration with suppliers and customers to ensure the alignment and common approaches are applied throughout our industry. And then to establish common mechanisms for reporting progress and sharing best practice. Primary things they're planning on tackle are basically emissions, which can be categorized into scopes 1, 2, and 3, where scope 1 would be carbon emissions generated from owned or controlled sources. 2 would be indirect emissions generated by the generation of purchased energy, for example. 3, which consists, I think, of upstream and downstream, where upstream, for example, would be transport not owned by the company, and downstream would be something like the end-of-life treatment of sold products. If anyone wants to know more about or get more information, you can go direct to the Net Zero Carbon Events website, which is netzerocarbonevents.org. Pretty straightforward. 2030 is quite a long way off, and I think we're going to see major change before then even. Already I've had, we're dealing with Africacom at the moment. We're dealing with mining in Durban at the moment as well, and all the organizers are already in all their correspondence saying, please give thought to not using one-off stands, to having stands reused multiple times. They're not getting specific into it can't be timber or anything like that. I think they're just sort of laying the seed for what's coming. Informa's got their better stand approach. I guess we'll see this year how strictly they enforce it. I don't think it'll be very strict this year, but I think in coming years, there's going to be a big push.
I wouldn't mind adding, maybe taking a step back and saying why this net zero, initiative is happening. I think a lot of people don't really understand what it's about, and the reasons why we speak about climate change, and the fact that we actually release 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases every year. And we need to transform everything that we do by 2050 to get to net zero. And if we don't, huge consequences in terms of climate change. Ice caps melt, sea levels rise, flooding occurs around major cities in the world, extinction of certain species due to their inability to evolve. Climates go crazy around the world. We'll see more wildfires. We'll see areas that are, water scarce at the moment, they'll turn into deserts. And if we thought that the pandemic was a huge problem, I mean, this is even bigger than that. And we can't sit around and wait until it occurs to start dealing with the problem. We need to deal with the problem now.
I think that's exactly what Beert said now, is that in the past it's almost been voluntary, and everyone's been waiting for someone else to do something. And there were initiatives from people like IFAS and UFI and so on to push it. Coming up to COP27, the guys realized that there's got to be something done by an industry. There is already legislation in some of the manufacturing and transport industries. And if it's self-regulated and self-imposed, it's a lot easier to accept than getting a book of rules shoved down your throat and comply and complain later. And I think we found that with a couple of other processes that we have been through. So I think we should all welcome the initiative and see how we all slot into it. From a personal side, I look at the scope, focus areas, and we should already be past 1 and 2. 1 and 2 should be par for the course. If you're not looking after your own home already, or your own factory as far as energy, waste and water is concerned, you've missed the boat already, and those should be par for the course. And we should start looking at things that, like Liam's spoken about, the Build Better stands from Informa. That type of program is what will kickstart and put a lot quicker.
I'm in agreement with what's been said, and I'm sort of a latecomer to the Net Zero Carbon Initiative, and not because I'm from Tabaga or Port Elizabeth, just that the exhibition industry down here is obviously not as vibrant, and after the 2 years of pandemic, we're sort of surfacing at the moment from it. But I think back to the times when I was involved with the Event Greening Forum, and the amount of greenwashing that happened, just because of the fact that it was the thing to do at the time. And I think we've all moved way past the point where we think it's the right thing to do for the sake of doing it. I think the figures speak for themselves, and looking at COP27, looking at the detail coming from scientists about where we are headed as a planet, every industry should be required to look within themselves. From our point of view, the exhibition industry is extremely wasteful and unsustainable in its current form. One thing that the pandemic maybe taught us was the amount of carbon emissions that we saved through not doing exhibitions. And I'm not proposing that we do away with conferences and exhibitions by any stretch, but there was almost a relief within me when we stopped using as much as we did. And we are heading back into some form of normality, and we are going to be building exhibition stands again, and that's our livelihood and the livelihood of many. So we have to be realistic, but we also, I agree 100% that it's no longer, we can't afford to greenwash anything and pretend that we are doing it for the points It needs to be done, as you say, Gary, from the heart. And if you aren't doing 1 and 2, which is basic sort of environmental care in your own space, then you need to really look deep down hard at that, because as an industry, I think that's why I came on board, is because I do feel strongly about our environmental issues at the moment, and it's definitely unsustainable. You know, I don't want to be a doomsdayist, but you know, we might have passed a tipping point already, but what we can do is all, as an industry, work towards improving our own usage and sustainability. So that's my little kickoff point.
I mean, from my perspective, you know, you have these conversations with people, and you know, it's not being disrespectful to people, but the amount of ignorance out there on the problem is actually staggering. I mean, Gary and I have chatted before, and I was telling him about my wife Mish, who does the art from beach plastic. It really creates amazing things, but you know, people look at the art and then they look again, and then they realize what they're looking at. And then when they get told where the plastic's actually coming from, I mean, it's literally from Long Beach down the road here, they actually can't believe it. They don't understand that there's plastic in the water, because they never see it, because they live in the suburbs in Constantia or Claremont or wherever. They don't get to see it often, so they don't understand there's a problem. And I think the exhibition industry's got a version of that going as well, where if anyone was in any doubt, if you just go to the AfricaCom breakdown and go to the loading yard after that show to see the huge mountain of MDF and chipboard that just gets piled out back, you know, that'll convince them otherwise that there's a problem. I mean, never mind the amount of plastic packaging and all sorts of stuff, people flying in from all over the world. I mean the problem is deep, but I think a lot of people have got their heads deep in the sand about it. They just they can't fathom that there's this big an issue.
I agree, Liam. It's taken me quite a long time to try and get my head around how do I operate a business in an industry that is so wasteful in a way, and I've struggled. I honestly have. I mean, I think we've all struggled, because we've known for a long time that this waste exists. It's extremely difficult to operate in a more sustainable way, and it's not an easy thing to do. And I think most people are burying their heads in the sand because it costs more money to follow the guidelines that we would propose. Yeah. And it's not an easy thing to do. It literally takes a mind shift, and it takes a while. Like I say, I didn't suddenly one morning wake up and decide that I was this concerned about the environment. It's just it's a process, and I think everybody needs to get on board and start that process.
Andrew, if I just want to jump in on one point that you made, and I think this is probably something contentious and something that'll be important going forward, that we look at how we view things, and that's that green is more expensive. I think probably 15 years ago, 10 years ago, if you go look at things like foodstuffs, where that bandwagon is being ridden, if you buy something organic, if you go and look at the reality of what the cost is versus what's being put in, it's a different story. So in greening, we must maybe just also define what is greed and what is reality. If people are practicing what is essentially circular economy thinking and better planning, which is part of sustainability, you'll actually find a point where you are being more effective and less effective. And I think that's part of the problem, is we're sitting with legacy systems that are in place, and it's very much like a coal-fueled energy system. Let's just ride that out until we get to the end before we start looking for a solution in the right direction. And I think it comes right down to fundamentals, like how do we actually do events? The whole idea of getting people to go to one place, fly hundreds of thousands of people in, build huge stands. We have to think what of that is actually contributing to good business, and what's coming out of it for the client at the end of the day, and what is where certain people just pocket money. Everyone sees a little opportunity to make something and they jump on it, and we never look at it in context of everything else. So if we start thinking of why people travel, what they actually need to see at the event, do they need to see a $1 million stand, or do they need to do a $5,000 stand to get the same result? And could we be splitting the events up and holding them in regions and making use of digital as an add-on to make it more effective? So I think part of this solution, well, not part, the solution is going to come from an entire industry, not specifically stand builders and suppliers, but from organizers, venues, end clients. We've had end clients already in 2014 that said no more big stands. We're doing away with all these huge stands. Everyone puts up a standard exhibition package. They achieve the same results. They've got the same clients, if not better clients, put better value into their conferences. And the guys doing the work, no one lost their money just by doing it more effectively.
Gary, I go along with everything you've said. And I do believe it's a mindset that has to change, and it has changed. I mean, the idea of losing money because you have to go the green route is something of the past, and we've moved past that. However, I'm assuming the next sort of 5 to 10 years, you speak to any exhibition stand builder who was building massive R1 million stands and suddenly isn't. There has to be a financial effect when they're not doing that. I mean, I'm just being the devil's advocate and saying that I would promote that you improve your presence at the expo or the conference with better staff and better AV and better things, that rather than build an elaborate stand. However, that there is a large part of our industry that make a lot of money and supply a lot of income to a lot of families on large stands, and that yes, it's going to change over time, but it's not something that can it's not going to change quickly. And I think if a client comes and says, I have R1 million, I want you to build a stand, you're not going to find too many people turning that down. So it's the problem is going to be wider than our industry. The problem is going to be trying to convince people who are at these expos that they need to be a bit more responsible. So yes, I'm with you, but realistically, it's a big mountain to climb, and we're right at the bottom.
I think what I'm saying is we must get as many people involved as possible. And if
absolutely,
if we're doing these podcasts, contention is important. Because those, it's the elephant in the room. And if we tiptoe around these problems, we've been tiptoeing around them for the past 15 years. I don't know how long event greening's been there. The change in industry has been minimal, with a watchdog about in the industry.
I'd say it's even worse than it was.
So it's not, client has got a budget at the beginning of the day that they want to spend. Whether they spend it on one stand or 10 stands, it's almost irrelevant. They'll spend that budget. Our responsibility as an industry is to give them something of value and to go back to them with innovation. We've got a car industry or motor vehicle industry that's highly innovative. We've got digital platforms that are highly innovative. We've got an exhibition industry that's making use of technology that we've had for 30 years. And you've got to think, are we not going to risk losing clients in any case if we don't adapt and become something that is better, more valuable, more innovative? And that's just part of moving towards sustainability as a globe, as a world. And I really think that an exhibition industry has been left behind. I look at guys in Kenya, Rwanda, their policies are like far ahead of ours. And we see ourselves as the leading country on the continent. So, you know, things need to change there.
Yeah, Gary, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, I think these, sorry, maybe coming to a first world and a third world context where, you know, perhaps in a third world, we're dealing with a lot of things at the moment. You know, it's water supply and it's electricity supply and things like that. You know, very often we need to, you know, our focus shifts to our primary needs before it shifts to our, you know, sustainability needs as such. But, you know, regardless of, we need to be cognitive of, you know, what footprint we end up leaving behind. And it's so important.
Guys, what changed in the exhibition industry? I mean, I remember, you know, I sort of came into it in the 90s. I worked with my brother Rob at IDG. They were part of the IDG group, which was Joburg, Cape Town, Durban as well, I think. And in the sort of 90s, we primarily built system stands. I mean, you know, IDG had all kinds of that Spaceline and Z-Line and all that stuff. And we pretty much only built stands out of that material. And then in the 2000s, it sort of started, the early 2000s, it started heading more towards custom. And then it almost just went exclusively custom. And it's sort of almost coming full circle now, where it's almost moving back away from there's a pushback against those big custom stands because of exactly what we're talking about. And people are just wondering, I mean, is there any anecdotal reason why it would have changed like that, or was led primarily from overseas, maybe going that way, and we just followed?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
So I came from a world of where we used to arrive at site with a truck full of chipboard and a skill saw in one hand. And 7 days later, we had an expo. You know, things change. Things need to be done faster. They need to look better, slicker. The move to system was quite huge, I think, and that was for me a turning point in the whole industry, because system was able to go out quick. But then people got to the point where system was the cheaper option. And I think especially if we look at first world versus third world, if you go to Europe, the turnover in their system and their infill panels and that type of thing is a lot quicker than what we do here. We tend to reuse things here, which is probably better in the long run. But the need for change, or the need to be unique, is always going to be what your client wants. And the move to those big stands, I think, was, you know, who's the bigger dog. If you go to a financial event, ABSA doesn't want a stand that's smaller than Capitec. That's what it's going to be. Also, that the times were good and the economy was good and people had money to spend, and sometimes spent it on things they didn't actually need. I think COVID, for me, has taught us that we can get away with a lot less than what we actually need and still get the same result. Take that learning and convert it into something. How do we make this valuable and innovative? I think it's about relooking how we approach things. It probably doesn't mean huge change. I think that's probably what people are kicking back against, saying that we're going to turn the whole industry on its head. I don't think it's going to be that at all. I think it's about looking at your systems and how you do things and your processes that you follow, and just tweaking them slightly to be better. And you'll find that it's not difficult to be 20% more sustainable, later 30% more sustainable. And if we're aiming at 2030, 2050, those goals suddenly become real.
Yeah,
small steps at a time.
Yeah, if I can jump in as well, I agree 100% with Gary. Your history lesson there was perfect. I remember when I started the industry in the early 90s with Scan, I think we were one of the first to bring in pop-ups and roll-ups, and it was all about, I mean, my first 6 months of exhibitions was pop-ups and roll-ups. Basically, it was a hard grind, I must just tell you. And then we moved into other things, but it was interesting because they were all reusable equipment, and it worked really well. And until people felt they needed they felt the need to be unique, they were very happy with the very user-friendly pop-up roll-up systems. And then it grew and grew and grew, and then we moved into. But I must be honest, I've in the past, since moving down to the coast, and I've been using a particular system, Octanorm. I've questioned often the need for anything else, because you can really, it requires a little bit more creativity from a designer or a person using it to use a system that is completely reusable. Sure, the panels, infill panels and things are, there's gonna be a little bit of weightage, but in the long run, I've often questioned it, why we don't use a lot more system. But I see that, like you say, Liam, that custom is starting to sort of fall by the wayside, I think, based on what we're discussing now. But I really do think, like Gary said, we need to look at it holistically, and it's not always about having a full-on exhibition stand. We could start promoting, but doing our own little 20% each could all contribute to a much better environment.
Agreed.
Yeah, Andrew, I think just to top up on that as well, I think there was a huge shift from custom to system as well, as commodity prices grew. And the purchase of a system is these days substantially more expensive than just calculating a couple of panels of chipboard that go into exhibition stands. So but in the long run, when you start working with system, you recoup those costs a lot better. It just boils sometimes down to a customer just wanting to sort this problem out right now, and I've only got this budget to do it in. So it's a linear thought process versus a circular thought process, and I think that was also one of the contributing factors why a lot went customs. But yeah, system does have an aesthetic look to it, if you know what I mean, or a specific aesthetic. And custom, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But I do think that systems have evolved over the last couple of years as well to look more custom. So there have been changes over time.
I mean, especially, in places like the US, I mean, at a lot of these big shows, sure, you see custom stands, but a lot of it is system built. Even some of the big stands there. And I think because they've got drayage costs to deal with, whereas I think we did a stand there a couple of years, 2014, I think it was, in Florida, and we shipped over a 40-foot container full of custom stuff. And the drayage cost was horrendous getting that into the venue. That was a full custom booth. I mean, never mind that you've shipped it across an ocean and flown people in. Whereas if that was system, you send 2 people over, stick it on a plane, and you're done. Or get it built there, even better.
Yeah, I think that's the small tweaks to what we're doing that we need to be looking at. So the basic plan of getting a stand, going across, setting it up, the design elements, nothing of that ever changes. Being innovative doesn't change. Using someone local instead of flying someone in, those small things, that's not huge. It comes down to holistic planning, and it comes down to planning ahead of time, getting your clients to think 3 years down the line instead of 6 months away or 2 weeks or 2 hours away. We've just done booths for people now that they woke up literally a week before the event. We'll get there, we can do it. We've got systems which would be thankfully sustainable, but it's, even though we're operating in a very sustainable environment, there's going to be wastage compared to having planned it properly.
Yeah.
Even on the rushed designs, you get losses and things like that. So the materials and the way you use things is not that important, but as what the planning ahead is important. You know, we won't get away from huge stands. You know, coming back from Euroshop, Beert was there. Those stands are massive. When we go back in 2023, I think they might be 20% smaller, but that's going to be a financial implication. And if that planning starts looking over a 3 or 5 year plan, or taking into account reaching 2030, the clients will draw value from it inevitably, buying ahead, paying ahead. But then it comes to us as an exhibition industry also maybe thinking in different terms. Instead of making a one-off huge cash sale, look in 5 years' time what you can get with this client, how you can have client retention, how you can have annuity income over the next 5 or 10 years. I think if you go to some of the big European, probably US companies as well, they've had clients for 30 years. They didn't make their money overnight. It wasn't a one-hit wonder. It's been a relationship that's been built, and you gather that over a period of time. And I think probably that's what we're missing in the South African industry. We're very much short-term, immediate satisfaction type environment. That's my opinion.
I came across a little extract that said, you know, at the end of the day, we're not looking for a few people to get to net zero or like recycle perfectly as such. We're looking for everybody to do a little bit at this stage in getting the ball rolling. You know, every bit right now helps towards the end goal, and it's going to, even what we're doing right now, it's a small percentage of what needs to be done, but we need to start somewhere.
Yeah.
I think what we need to push home with people is be proud of that innovation. If you've done something, however small, if you've saved 2% on your stand, tell people about it and be proud of it. Because the next person will save 4%. And once we get that boulder rolling down the hill, then it's easy. But at the moment, I think we tend to stand and wait, and we tend to want to see a 90% transformation immediately instead of a 1% at a time. Yeah. And that's blinding us in a way.
Yes, I have to agree. And there is no silver bullet for this. It literally is, like Gary says, you need to, I think if we all, and I've seen it at work when I do environmental programs here in Kleberga, where we get involved. It's the creating that momentum, and it's very slow to start. I mean, just an example is the seismic survey, the Shell seismic survey, and how that became quite a massive movement in a very short space of time. But it's because people were prepared to do something and promote it. You know, if I'm going to build an exhibition stand and I feel it's really done really good service to net zero carbon initiative, then I'm going to promote it, and it needs to be put out there. Yeah.
All right, gents, I think we're officially out of time. So just before 10, as promised. So yeah, let's call it, and we'll be in touch on WhatsApp. I'll get this all spruced up and edited and put it out to everyone at the board, and then hopefully we can get it distributed. I'll send you a copy of the recording as well.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
See you guys.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good day.